Yo, GM Adam, how are you feeling this morning? Are we going to zero? Bitcoin is down, what, 5%, 6%?
How crypto ends on a turn of a dime, man. It's like all happy and then it's all going to zero. Oh, we were wrong, bro. It's so funny, man. People like drama, like at the core. It's just people love, people don't want to be bored, man. And whatever floats your boat. Has it changed anybody's opinion really who's in the space? Probably not. But yeah, it's funny to watch, and I see all the spaces popping up.
It's the reverse Jim Cramer, dude. Never fails, to say the least.
Wait, what did Cramer say?
So yesterday he said that he was super bullish on Bitcoin and that it could be stopped.
The kiss of death.
So what I was reading, one of my buddies who runs a trading bot against him, and said Jim Cramer is like 40% over the last like 3 years when it comes to crypto or something like that. So
40% of the time, he's right 100% of the time. Is that right? He did sell the Pico top last year, though. He did well, or last cycle, I should say. He sold it like, I don't know, 55 or something like that. He got out. I remember that trade. Never heard the end of that one. But dude, all these guys throw darts, dude. That's all they do. That's why I don't never listen to any kind of stock picker trader. Forget these guys, man. It's just, and especially don't listen to any chart readers. Charting is literally astrology for dudes. Like, forget like whoever made up that quote, that's right, bro. Like, charting is ridiculous. Like, charting is stupid, especially in crypto. It's like, forget it, man.
So the report that came out this morning was from a company called, I got to find the name, but it was actually run by Jihan Wu. I don't know if you guys remember that. That is a throwback. That was one of the co-founders of Bitmain back in the day, one of the first and earliest and largest industrial mining providers. Somebody out of his camp came out and said that the ETF was going to get approved, and had a big sell-off. Now I just read that the SEC is meeting with the NASDAQ and everyone down there on Wall Street. Oh, right here. It says SEC schedules meeting today with the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and CBOE to finalize comments on spot ETF.
Well, it's a good thing no insider trading is going to take place. Like that, at least we know that information stays close hold. And nobody, takes advantage of insider knowledge. So at least we know that's happening.
Absolutely could never. I heard Nancy Pelosi's actually long Bitcoin right now. So.
Oh boy, leverage long. I mean, you hear all this stuff. I did read some stuff. It's like, oh, what they're doing is they're wiping out all the long positions so they can rebuy in right now. So yeah, who knows, man? Who knows?
All kinds of things.
That's why I like to stay away from this game. Because it's just, why would you put yourself in this kind of stress position? It just doesn't make any sense. If you believe in crypto, if you're here building in the space, why would you even worry about this stuff, man?
Yeah, trading leverage is fun though, right, Chris?
Oh, I bet.
Where we got our beginnings in crypto 2016, 17 was just being just absolute leverage degens. I'm not nearly as good as Chris is, but how are you feeling this morning, Chris? What do you think? You think ETF gets approved this week, or are we going down further?
I think ETF probably gets approved this week. I think that, with a leverage wipeout like that, and you saw maybe some coins take a 20% hit, it's going to take a lot of selling, of spot selling, to get the price anywhere near those levels again. So I think some big bills happened on that wick. So I would expect us to spot the ETF.
Yeah, I feel it. Yeah, your mic was cutting out a little bit. I don't know.
I did that yesterday too. Let me know.
It's just light. We can barely hear you.
Yeah. So there's a few topics that I want to cover. Excuse me. First, the space, we were actually supposed to have Leo and Tio come on and talk sub 100K. Apparently, that's causing way too many issues with the community. So they canceled it. Tio's stance. I don't know. We can sit here and talk about it for a second because I'm still kind of interested. Tio's had this like very outsized take against sub 100K, which I think it leaves a lot of people really confused why he's putting so much attention to it. So he reached out to me over the weekend and said, hey, we should do a debate about it. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. I didn't listen to the Ordinal show on Monday. I don't know, Adam, were you there on the Ordinal show on Monday?
I was there briefly, but it was, they do 5-hour shows. I can't.
Something happened during that show to where then Leo messaged me the next day and was like, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. So I don't know what was said, but he said it was just causing too much controversy with the community. To me, like looking at Tio's opinions of the sub 100K, obviously me, you and Leo, we're biased. We come from the historical NFT community. We've had this thesis for literally over 3 years, right? But now it's just more refined down to ordinals. Before we were just broad. This was all old, right? Yeah. Sub 100K for us is actually like name coin assets going back to 2011, right? So now it's just more refined, and it's the same debates that are happening. And we'll get into this when we talk about NodeMonkes here, because they also are taking these like first kind of claims.
Yep.
But sub 100K, like one of the main things that I keep seeing Tio talk about is he compares it to projects. And one of the projects he keeps comparing it to is Bitmap. And he's like, well, Bitmap is 3 times the floor of sub 100K. And I kept saying to him, I responded a few times saying, you're comparing literal singular assets to an entire project. Like
Yeah,
to
that
me,
could
it's just like you're comparing apples to oranges. It's two different things, right? Sub 100K is a retroactive collection of 100 assets that were individually minted, not which didn't have intention to be a project, right? Well, in the sub 100K, you obviously have like Bitcoin
Sure.
Punks, NodeMonkes,
We've
and
seen that with Namecoin, as you said. It's the same thing.
it's the same thing with like the Twitter eggs and all this stuff and blockheads and all these ones.
Yep.
Going back and retroactively like putting a collection together, you know, years later, and then finding out that there's a lot of similarities between what people were doing, collectors find a lot of value in that because it
Sure.
means that people were there with the right opinion at the right time. There was no blueprint in the way to go about creating ordinals at the time. And a lot of collectors find that very valuable, right? I used to use this kind of reference in the historical NFT community. If anyone wants to join the conversation too, please come up. I would use this reference a lot. You know, one of the biggest naysayers of you know, Namecoin assets was the NFT relics community, and the whole idea was like you can't retroactively go back and group these assets together based off of their similarities. They're like saying it's kind of inauthentic, I guess is kind of what they were saying. But if you've ever gone to a museum, that is literally everything that sits in a museum. Is literally these were Aztec pottery, right?
Yeah,
these whisker the baskets that were made by the Egyptians. That is literally the whole point of history.
Humans just naturally classify stuff. That's the way we do it.
Mm-hmm. And so taking these like baskets, right? Let's just say like Aztec, we'll use like Aztec pottery, right? You go back and you say, yeah, this Aztec pottery, the floor, right, for these is whatever, I don't know, $100,000. But then you go compare it and you're like, oh, well, look at this mainstream company that's producing billions of dollars in pottery per year. He's like, obviously something's different here, right? And you're like, well, no shit. One is like an active company building and trying to build actual, you know, income and revenue streams in a capitalistic model versus people who are just creating things because they were interested in it, right? At the time, they were on the kind of the forefront of innovation. So I was excited for that conversation. Maybe we can have that again in the future. I don't know, but what's your take on it, Adam?
Well, I mean, when I first saw Tio write about it on X, I thought he was literally just trolling. Like I thought him and Leo had like decided it offline. Look, let's do a little like battle, even though we don't really feel hardcore positions on this. I mean, I know Leo does, but I wouldn't have thought Tio had that kind of stance. I mean, let's frame it though. Like sub 100K, what's the floor of that? Like obviously there are ones which are far more valuable than other ones, right? I don't know if you're a NodeMonkey or you are some sort of collection, if you're a rock or you're this, you know, you're part of a well-known collection. Obviously that one's going to have far more value than me, you know, putting a picture of myself on ordinals and this number 90,000. Who cares, right? So there's just this wide berth in like value. And I don't think like, does the 102nd, you know, thousandth have tremendously less value than the sub 100K? Not really either. I mean, anytime we've seen like huge collections like that, it gets really, really, your floor price is just, the floor is never going to like have this massive rise. It's just not, because it's just a massive collection of 100,000 of anything. It's almost impossible to move that floor price. So I get what Tio's saying. I think Tio is just kind of putting his flag in the sand. If he's serious, I think he was putting his flag in the sand like, hey, I don't think these are going to be like, you know, half a Bitcoin or anything in the future, which I would 100% agree with him, because there's just such a value dispersion between things that are like interesting, part of a collection, an artist, some interesting story to it, and just, you know, monkeys like me who are just throwing anything on there, right? So, you know, there's just going to be this wide berth. I actually don't think there's much to argue about it. I mean, we just naturally, yeah, Tio's kind of argument that we shouldn't even classify this or humans don't classify stuff, that's just silly. I mean, we obviously do. We tend to do the ones that are kind of the most like easy to get our heads around. So 100,000, we naturally go to like, you know, nice round numbers, and people will try to manipulate those numbers all over the place, right, to fit their own bag. So sub 10K, maybe I had my project sub 20K, you know, and people are always trying to influence marketplaces and stuff to include their particular bag, you know, framework. But we've seen, like, we're fortunate that we've been here for years and seen this kind of like discussion play out. You know, would I buy a sub 100K simply because it's a sub 100K? No, not at all. You know, but just, you know, yeah, that's for the individual collector to decide rather than like some sort of narrative that makes it valuable or not, you know.
Yeah, you know, it is interesting if you look at like the similar debates we had in historical NFT community. Obviously, there's dates, right? The cutoff seemed to be, you know, 2017 going into 2018 was kind of like that cutoff for a lot of collectors. Any NFT 2017 and earlier will have value. It'll have that kind of historical value. But then there was this like
But
cultural.
we get into even that, right? It's like, okay, well, I don't know, whatever the one was on the last day, it wasn't the rocks, but whatever was on the last day of
the
2017.
castles,
right? Realms of Ether, right? The realms. So that's on the last day of 2017, and I don't even know what popped up today. It was crypto cards, right? Crypto cards are like the first week of 2018. There's literally like 8 days difference, right? Does that mean that the 2017 is 5 times more valuable than the 2018? You know, this is where you get into just value debates amongst collectors, right? It's just, that's the fun part, honestly. That's
yeah. I got one point, and then I'll call him Prism right afterwards. Was, you know, even outside of, you know, the, you know, chronological time difference, whether you're using a numerical value of a sub 100K or using a date of 2017 or 2018, there are these other, you know, kind of pillars, or you could say, that collectors will reference to ascribe value to. So like in the historical NFT community, anything pre ERC 721 was considered a value, right? Because ERC 721 was when NFTs became standardized and all the NFTs used the same contract. I believe that came in like March 2018.
Yep.
So that was even then 3 months after, right? 2017. And a lot of people start collecting that because they're like, oh, these are all non-standard NFTs. These were people who used their own brilliance to say, hey, let's create an NFT with what we have here to go about it, right? That's kind of like originality. I forget what the specific number is, but somebody proposed the similar thing to me for ordinals, which is actually pre BRC20, which I think is around like 300,000 range, something like that, which I find interesting because there's still to this day only like 1.5 million inscriptions that aren't BRC20. Right. So you're saying out of 52 million, only what, 2% or 2.5% are really just art based kind of idea. So it, you know, it is an interesting debate, but to me, it's comparing apples to oranges. What do you think, Prism?
Yeah, it's like we're and thanks for having me up, guys. I love the space. I always try to catch it. I mean, this is one of the best spaces out here. Yeah, so we always get caught up in these numbers. Like Adam's 100% right. We always want to, like, in the moment, try to figure out what is going to be this long lasting thing. But the reality is, hype dies. And 999 out of 1,000 projects that launched in 2021 are now sitting at 0. And those were all hyped. Those people were excited to get in those and mint those. But value actually takes time to develop. And so, like, the famous mint is probably like Fidenzas. They took some time to even mint out. You had, I think it was like an hour to go mint these things, and look where they are now. I mean, look at like Rare Pepe's selling for what's close to 68th, if not there yet. Like, real value takes time to develop. You don't know what's going to be culturally significant until later on. Totally. And so, like, it's just something to keep in mind. Like, extend your time frames a bit. You don't have to mint everything. Mint the things you really like and you believe in.
I think that what you just mentioned about like cultural significance, that's actually the part that, you know, anybody who's a collector can actually play a role in, especially with whatever the NodeMonkes or whatever we want to talk about next, right? That building a community. I mean, I think you've seen it with what Bitcoin Frogs or whatever, you know, during where it got kind of low there in July and August, you know, the community was still around. I'm still seeing frog PFPs everywhere. They kind of made it through a little bit of a mini bear there. and are out on the other side. And I think, we've seen from successful, historic NFT projects, they've kind of gone through a couple of cycles of these, and each time gathered more collectors, more interest. And that is actually one of my kind of thesis about all these kind of early ones, is that, yes, of course, some are going to be infinitely more valuable than others, but none of them die, right? And so they can kind of have this rediscovery moment multiple times and at least gain interest multiple times, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the ETH collections and Bitcoin, right? The two premier historical NFT collections is Pepe's and Punk's. And those are the two that have now survived two full bear markets where the community didn't die out. I mean, one of the famous stories about Punk's is that the group chat was less than 1,000 people from when it was created up until like February of 2021 before it blew up. And the Pepe guys, right? That was also pretty much on chain.
Like 5 dudes in a Telegram, bro.
On chain, it was a dead community, but they still had the Telegram going, right? You could go into the same Pepe Telegram now. That was the same one that they started in 2016. It's the same exact chat. Never died. But if you look at all those Pepes, right, there's some that before 2021 hadn't moved in like 2 years.
Yep.
And so just because the assets hadn't moved, the community, still was there, being kind of really at the forefront of it. And then one more example, and then I'll call on 21 right after. Mooncats is a good example. Obviously, I'm biased, but they were actually a rediscovery, right? The Pondaware team that ran Mooncats, they had it launched a month and a half after Punk's, and they minted 5,000 between 2017 and 2018. Then the website went offline. Pondaware went away for 3 years. Then they came back, had this crazy historical kind of moment that kind of really lit off the historical NFT movement. They got up to like a 2 ETH floor, and then they came down, and they're called stable cats, right? Because they've sat at 0.3 range for literally over a year.
Yep.
But there is now like a natural floor there where they just do not go lower than that. I think they're at like 0.25 now or something like that. And you see who's a Gordon that bought a Mooncat yesterday and was tweeting about it. If you have that historical significance, people are always going to recognize it. It's always going to be like the, hey, I know they're going to be there. I know they're a safe bet. They move up a lot slower. It's more like Bitcoin, to where these assets will gain value much slower than the PFP, but they also have a lower floor or a lower price depreciation. Mooncats during 2023 went down. I think they were actually positive on the year. They got down to 0.2 and ended the year on 0.3. Now they're down to like 0.25. And I think somebody this morning swept 50 of them for like 50K or something like that. So you'll have these people who always know it's a safe bet to come in, but they'll go chase the shiny things, but that value is always going to be there.
The cats obviously struggle from a huge supply of whatever, 25,000 thereabouts. But actually the one that was coming to my mind about, just to keep in mind, a project that we all know it was massively historically important, like maybe the most important of all time, which was CryptoKitties, right? But the supply is basically it's millions, right? And so it's, 99% of those, 99.9% are basically worthless, right? So keep that in mind. CryptoKitties, you can absolutely be massively, like it's almost impossible for another project to have that kind of impact ever again. Probably will never happen again. But it doesn't matter because there's just infinite supply. And yeah, you'll have like the super rares. Once a year, somebody will buy one of the expensive ones. I know Leo's got a super expensive one. Like once in a while, one of those will trade to a Uber collector. But the vast majority, there is no second tier. It's the 100 most rare and then zeros. And I think in a lot of ways, like with your Mooncats, like if you're going to see a serious price appreciation, it may happen right on the, for the super rares, right? The number one, the one that traded in 2019, or your Genesis cats or something, right? The uber rares, if you're going to see a crazy price run, it may be on those. So who knows?
Yeah,
keep it in mind.
The Genesis Mooncat, so my PFP sits between 20 and 30 ETH and just like rarely ever drops below 20 ETH. It's very surprised, but it is slow moving. You'll see one sale every month, maybe. If you're lucky, maybe you'll see 2 or 3, but it just does not happen that often. But the value is there because people kind of respect that. So we'll go to 21 and then Hydrate and then Chris right after.
Yo, what's up, everybody? I actually have a crypto kitty in my Ethereum vault that I keep just because it looks like my cat Shipley. So, you know, at least there's some of the crypto kitties that are worth millions to me in my vault. But yeah, I actually I changed my name to On-Chain Cowboy. So for those of you that know me as 21, I am now On-Chain Cowboy. I feel like I'm from Texas, so you know it better represents me. But thanks for having me on. I just wanted to echo the narrative that I really agree with, in terms of like, we don't know what will be culturally significant. And I don't think numbers will have a huge play when it comes to, you know, the inscriptions that are valuable in the future, because they're just numbers. And I don't really think, like, I just don't really think that means anything, especially, you know, knowing how much junk was just being inscribed, you know, how much was just tests and things along those lines. I think, like, I look at the projects that, you know, I tried to put into my portfolio that were, you know, unique, and someone took time to come up with this concept or come up with this art, or, you know, because like for those of you that were there in February, I mean, that initial like 300 to 1,000 inscriptions took a few days, and then once it got to 1,000, it kind of ran to 10,000 really quickly, and then we were off to 100K. And it was like, if you were able to, you know, coherently put something together that was artistic or like somehow captured the moment. I like to talk about Gold Rush. I'm a part of the Gold Rush team, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm shilling or anything. And I do have 4 of them, but I feel like Gold Rush was a really cool example of this, like capturing the culture, because what happened with Gold Rush is the first 50 were able to make it sub 5K. And then the second batch of 50, we were just able to get it. It's like 10,400, 10,500, which in the moment was super disappointing. And it's like, oh shit, like I wish we could have gotten it, you know, into the sub 10K, but it's almost cooler like that, because it takes that moment of like, there was a gold rush happening on Bitcoin, and it captures it. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. I think it's up to those projects that are culturally significant and whatnot. And yeah, I didn't know that there's just still 1.5 million JPEGs. That's pretty crazy. Y'all BRC20 people are crazy.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. Go ahead, Hydrate. I think you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me up. I'm a big fan of Emblem Vault. I have some of my own stuff wrapped on there. And yeah, just I agree with what others are saying. The human provenance is really important. Who made the stuff and why? Were they experimenting? Were they making art? What have they done before? So I try to have people zoom out and think about if we were on Antiques Roadshow in 100 years and people were looking at a USB or whatever with the ordinal on it, and you watch that show and they talk about, well, this was a clockmaker in Philadelphia, this was a pottery person in Massachusetts, and they echoed the style of this. So you just think about, you know, why were these projects made? Who's behind it? What have they done before? And what's really important is what did they do after? Did they stay consistent? So you look at the punks community on ETH, and people stuck around and talked, and there was a lull in the action for a long time. And then a group of people collectively decided it had value. And so if you have enough people that know each other and think something's cool, they'll run it up and it will become significant. I mean, that's what museums do with art. You know, certain art collectors decide this thing is worth something, and you know, it is. So, you know, really cool to see what's happening with the NodeMonkes, and really cool images. And I just think people have to think for the long game. I think 100K, anything under 100K is going to be important. I'm following this Japanese artist who gave 100 ordinals to people who had his other project, but nobody knows them, and they're not worth anything, and they're sub 100K, but who cares, right? So I think it just matters when somebody with money comes in and decides something's cool, it kicks off that snowball. And if the artist can maintain their composure and keep building and stay consistent, you'll see that collection have permanence. And I'm really encouraged to see a lot of these projects in 50, 100 years. People will study us. We are interesting. Our provenance is important. So I just encourage people to take those chances, stay consistent, don't leave the space, always check in with your collectors. And I mean, me personally, I wrapped a photograph on Emblem Vault. I've been doing on-chain photography on ETH, and I think you could use this as a way to preserve history. To me, it's fun to make images, but I work with a lot of Nat Geo people who Nat Geo lost a lot of their metadata, so they had a lot, like thousands of photos that Nat Geo had in their archive, and they lost all of the metadata associated. And the photographers were just beside themselves because they have the image, but they don't have that story that's locked in the data. So if we could use blockchain for historical preservation, I think we'll see a whole new tide of archives starting to be permanently put on chain, as it's the best way to store things in the world.
I completely agree. 2 points. Well, first, I've said this a lot, that if I wasn't at Emblem, what I'd be working on right now is like some sort of like on-chain library for Bitcoin, or for whistleblowers to put like to preserve that documentation and that type of information. I think is important. I'm really surprised nobody's really truly even attempted to do this yet. It seems like such an easy, low-hanging piece of fruit to grab. Second, too, in terms of like needing just one big collector to come in and determine that this is significant, I think Deep Black, if you're familiar with that, is like a very good example. It's one of the earliest kind of AI projects from 2019. When we were in the historical community, we came across it and we were like, wow, this is insane. And it sat around a 0.1 ETH floor for like a year or two. And then Seed Phrase, the guy who owns the rarest CryptoPunk, came in and I think about like 40 of them or 50 of them. And now it's literally one of the most valuable AI art collections. And it literally just took one or two people to come in and say, hey, this is significant. And it's because the supply is quite small too. I think it's only like a few thousand. So that's all you really need. Some people just don't really have that patience. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah. Reset the mic, so hopefully it
Yep.
sounds a little bit better.
Sounds better.
But yeah, provenance definitely matters a ton, especially on a long enough time scale. But one of the most interesting examples to me is just CryptoPunks versus V1 CryptoPunks. Like arguably, I think anyone logical would agree that V1 has a better story, better lore. They have better provenance. But V2 punks, what we see today, have way more historical sales. So the narrative prevailed everything. And they attracted so much sticky capital that gave them a long-standing history of high sales. And now that just kind of stuck with everything. And so that's like the predominant collection. And so everyone is making different kind of bets, whether that'll be the case in the future. There's a whole entire community of the V1 punks that think eventually they'll overtake V2 punks, but it's just, who's going to be able to tell? We're going to have to wait and see that. But just kind of to throw my opinion on provenance versus narrative, and I think narrative just prevails.
Yeah, you actually have a really good point. A lot of I think almost all of them, of the older collections, the V2 is generally more valuable. With CryptoPunks, right? V2 is more valuable. With EtherRock, V2 is more valuable. I think there's a few of them. I think with CryptoCats, the V2 is more valuable. There's a handful of these situations, and it never changes. Oh, Pixel Map, I think the V2 is more valuable. Ethereum, right? It just goes on. And that is the narrative in the community that came in and said, hey, this is historically significant, but we're going to take our culture on this contract. Maybe because it's more improved or whatever, or the community that was their bags and they just decided to build around that.
Or the dev was there, and so they followed whatever the dev wanted, and the dev wanted the more recent contract, right?
Always going to want it.
Always going to want it. I mean, it's when we were doing rediscoveries, it was like, learn my lesson, man. If you didn't look for the older contract first, bro, prepare to get wrecked. Like, I mean, there were a couple of ones. I'm thinking of one. The other, it was like the book. What was that book? I don't know. The dude released it, and like,
my blockchain corner.
Yeah, my mom. Yeah, and it was like 30 minutes later, somebody like, what about this other contract? And I was like, dude, no. Just spent 5 ETH on these stupid books or whatever, Hey, that's what it is. You get wrecked sometimes. But yeah, certainly in the historical NFT community, we love, the earlier contract, the first contract. But, if there's a history, and most of the value, Chris is right, accrues to the later version, the V2 or whatever it is, very difficult for the V1 to overtake, almost impossible.
But building on historical significance is tends to be a nice play. I mean, we see NodeMonkes now are around 0.2 Bitcoin, right? They're sitting around $9,000, and they are an early 10K collection. They claim to be first. I think there's like 4 different teams that claim to be first, and it's all off of different nuance, right? So let's kind of dissect that for a second.
I was the first on a Thursday, bro.
We went through the same exact thing in the historical
Same
NFT community. The first debate never ends well. Never claim to be the first because it's just a losing battle, right? So the 4 different teams that are claiming to be the first 10K, you have Bitcoin Punks, On-Chain Monkeys, NodeMonkes, and I think the Badgers, and they all have a different type of claim. The Bitcoin Punks, they came in and I think they inscribed first, and they concluded their 10K. Obviously, it's copy pasta art, but they concluded their 10K. I forget the specific numbers, like right around after 10K or 20K or 30K. Danny from On-Chain Monkeys came in, right? So Bitcoin Punks had 10,000 individual inscriptions. NodeMonkes came in and they put all 10,000 images on a single set and said, hey, we're the first 10K because we finished this 10K before you inscribed the last 10K, right? So that's the first differing opinion. And
Right.
both
Some
of
people would
those,
say that's not a real 10K if it's all on one side.
right?
Yeah.
But also both of those are not original art because Danny took the On-Chain Monkey images from ETH, right? Which is his own collection. So it's not really, you could say he's copy pasta, but he's just transferring the value there.
Yep.
And then you have NodeMonkes who came in and said that they are the first 10K, but what they actually mean is saying they're the first 10K of original art. The Badgers came in and they're also 10K original art. They started their 10K before NodeMonkes did, but NodeMonkes concluded the last 10,000 before they did, right? So you have these 4 teams who are all saying they're first.
Yeah.
Who's actually first? I don't know. To me, I would say Bitcoin Punks, right? If you 10,000 individual ones, to me, is a little more authentic, even if it is a copy pasta. But these are the same debates we had in the historical NFT community. Obviously, now with NodeMonkes going to extreme heights, did that impact it? Some people are claiming the fraudulent claim is one of the reasons why of claiming the first. To me, I just think low inscription number is that value. Like, regardless of, as we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, whether you're 100,000, 100,001, 99,000, yes, there may be a slight difference, but history is subjective first, and it's more on a spectrum. There's really no point because collectors are going to collect. Collectors collect weird shit. As we were buying Namecoin assets, everyone was getting mad at us doing this, and we were like, we're not even selling these. We're just collecting them. Like, there's the resale value of these is like horrendous. So I don't know why people would like get so upset about it. It's just like, dude, I'm taking my money and buying things that I find enjoyable.
But it's stupid, Jake. It's stupid. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, like, you know.
And so with NodeMonkes, right? I think there's a much more at play here. It's the art is pretty cool. The auction itself, you know, the going back and forth was one of the reasons I didn't get in the auction. I don't own a NodeMonkey. I was just not really, you know, in the field of wanting to participate in something where there was just too many questions around it. Who is the VC that offered 5 million? They never said this. Was that even real? Right? Was that all marketing? It was supposed to be a free mint, then it wasn't. Then they raised 10 million. But ultimately, I think one of the reasons why it went to 2 Bitcoin, or it's at 0.2 Bitcoin, is that it brought over a lot of ETH and whales, and a lot of probably Bitcoin whales are participating as well. But they don't want to participate in free mints. They want to move liquidity around. The fact that they could come in and spend and have a floor at $1,000 and they could start showing off their wealth of now spending, you know, 10, 20, 30,000 or even higher, somewhere even up to 3 Bitcoin. To them, that's what they want to play in. They don't want to sit around and do these free mints and wait, you know, months for that provenance to increase the value. They just want to participate. And so that was a little bit more of their style. Yes, I did see that there was like a chart that was saying 20% of the NodeMonkes sales are wash trading, which is probably more of just a market maker, to be honest. There are NFT market makers that exist, you know, whether that's contracted by Magic Eden or by NodeMonkes, or is just whales who just come in and market make and arbitrage the differences and the mispricings. That is normal, right? To me. And yes, maybe it is inauthentic, but that's just kind of how markets operate. And so to me, it seems like NodeMonkes are going to stay. Will they be the most valuable? I don't know. But the fact that there is so many rares being bought up shows that there is like real interest, right? Or it could just be market makers trying to inflate the price. But
Yeah, I mean,
think
I was stunned by the amount of ETH guys in it, right? It was obviously they were looking, like you just said, they're looking for liquidity. They're just seeing whatever's floating on X as pumping, as excitement, and they're just jumping on it. And so that's you see that when there's an opportunity for price go up, and obviously price has gone up here. Get ready for the dump, though.
I'm not trying to FUD NodeMonkes. I think they're cool, but and I think I would argue that the first sub 10K collection is the sub 10K inscriptions. Like, because the reason why CryptoPunks are so valuable and unique is because they were the first, PFP collection 10K. It sort of set the standard, and I think nobody knew that was going to be a meta at that time, and that's what makes it so valuable. And I think that's what we see with sub 10K, where nobody knew that was going to be a meta. Like when we were inscribing things and coming up with stupid little collections, like I don't think people were really thinking about that 10K and all the tests and all the different file formats and whatnot. Like I think that's the first sub 10K collection, but I don't know, maybe I'm the only one.
I think a lot of people were thinking about 10K. I think a lot of people were like, how can I get it sub 10K? I think that was definitely on people's minds early.
For sure.
It's I mean, also to keep in mind, the top 2 or top 3 highest sales in ordinal history are all sub 100 assets, right? That'll always maintain, and it generally will be throughout history, no matter if you're in NFTs or you're in the antique business or whatever comes next in virtual reality. Whatever's the earliest assets are always going to have probably the highest premium, but they are also going to be the toughest to offload, because you have to pair yourself with that one specific collector who's looking for that story. And when it comes to NodeMonkes, right, whether they are the first 10K or not, they're here to stay. And to me, we could debate this, and I'll ask Adam what you think, but I think it's positive. Yes, it does. Like when wealth comes in, it kind of dissipates culture, because it's like kind of this like commercialization. This happens in every industry. I grew up as like a big rave kid, and this idea of like Plur and like everyone being together was awesome. And then once the money came in, that just completely got wiped away, and they start trying to commoditize everything.
Yep.
So here, if this is something like that, where now you have wealth coming in from all these other chains, do you think it is positive for ordinals, or is it just going to lead to a ton of grifting and scams that could potentially be detrimental to the community?
It's definitely going to have that 1,000,000%. And you get all this kind of movement, and like you're seeing with the NodeMonkes right now, where it's like it will feel like a pump and dump, and there will be people who buy the top and they will get wrecked, and so there'll be bad vibes and all the rest of it. It's unavoidable. Like this is what crypto is. But just to this idea, what was popping up in my mind was like, well, what's the most valuable kind of collection right now? Like what would be the most valuable one? And I think of rocks, and I think of, okay, what are the early ones? But you start thinking and you say, well, look, if the Taproot Wizards, right? If Udi put a couple of those up for sale, how much would those go for, right? You start thinking of that, and he's built up so much, like, I don't know, because he hasn't given them out, basically. So much pent up demand for them that those potentially may be the most expensive, just long term, if he plays it right. And certainly Udi seems like he's slow rolling it, which at the beginning I thought was a terrible strategy. I'm all more about like disperse the stuff to the community, let the community build, and then of course you go trading and sales and so on and so forth. But he's really slow played it, and I think it's actually quite genius now, where it's like, what people would do to get one. And if they got one, the odds of them selling it are basically zero, right? If Udi gave me one today, that's just getting locked away. I mean, I'd change my PFP and I'd probably never sell it, right? So you can imagine what those would trade for on secondary. So I don't know.
If you look at like their capital raise, right? They raised $7.5 million. So between those people on the cap table, they're deciding that those 21 that they have in treasury is worth at least $7.5 million. So it is kind of a genius play. I do think they will probably be more valuable than NodeMonkes, but they also followed the same playbook, right? Inscribe early, walk away for 8 months, 10 months, build your narrative, and then eventually they'll hit the market and let the FOMO come in. Like he's smart because now there is more interest in ordinals. You're seeing it. But I have seen, a handful of tweets from some of the larger OG crypto accounts. I think like I saw Moon Overlord talking about how the reason why he believes NodeMonkes pumped is he just said there's nothing else of interest for those type of people, which probably plays into the liquidity and, brand familiarity and things like that. But this is a native collection, and there are a few ones that are still hanging around. I know Leonidas has a sub 100K, 10K collection or something. He's posted about it before that. I don't know if he sold it or what the case is, right? So there's a handful of these. You have the Shrooms, which is a sub 1K, which I think is only like a few hundred. So there are a few of those that are still coming around. Also with 10K, with the creation of parent-child inscriptions, you could theoretically have 10,000 collections just using the sub 10K kind of narrative, which is what on-chain monkeys have done. So even though the history, can't change, in this situation, it kind of could be added on, right?
It can. The narrative can change. That's for darn sure. 100%.
Go ahead, Prism, and then we'll go to Hydrate right after.
Yeah, you called out the attraction to NodeMonkes. Part of that being like this higher perceived value. This is, I think, this was the biggest takeaway that I've had from NodeMonkes. There's been so many free mints, and you can grift any way that you want. Like you can put out a high price mint, you can put out a free mint. There's ways that you can grift around that, but the larger market is not interested in free mints. They're interested in collections that have a higher perceived value. It's part of this like FOMO factor, right? Like if you have $100 floor, people aren't interested, but then that floor gets to 1,000, and now it's like, man, I can't fade this any longer. So I think this is like a wake up call to the ecosystem. And I think with new eyes coming into ordinals, we're going to see a portion of these early adopters kind of left behind because they're less willing to adapt, and they believe, like things should always be the way they were. And the new market participants who have been here in crypto for a while and have collected elsewhere, they're comfortable with these fee rates. They're comfortable with paying a higher price. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic. There's so many dynamics that we're going to see play out over the next 12 months that will sort of flip some things that we thought about previously. But I think ultimately, people will be more interested in things that actually have substance.
Yeah, I agree as well. Hydrate, what do you think?
I watched closely the Bored Ape run up, and I went to a lot of in-person events. And one condition I noticed is you have a lot of excitement and a lot of people really happy about it and just promoting it everywhere and just going crazy and creating euphoria. And when it gets to a certain price point, you start to lose some of that enthusiasm. And if the baton is not passed to equally enthusiastic people, then you're looking at a top. So like I know a lot of photographers. I do photography, so I know John Knopf, Dave Krugman, and they both had apes. They both sold them near the top. And to me, when I started to see some of the really fun, authentic voices leaving, I wondered, who's gonna take on the cloak of this? And obviously there was controversies and things with their mints and whatever, but I just don't want collectors to be delusional. I think we have two kinds of people. We have more like traditional collectors, and then we have degenerates. And the more traditional collectors are usually more solvent. They can hold on to things longer. They usually appreciate the images more. But what I saw, because I was out, some of you have been in NFT a long time. I've been doing NFT since 2019. And what I saw, once Bored Ape came, the average buyers changed, and there's a lot more money involved, but the people had a lot more demands, and people tend to make a project into something that it's just not. And so I just, it's funny, I just caution people to, when you're getting really excited about something and you see the team making a lot of forward-looking statements, again, it's back to Providence. What has the team worked on before that? Have they scaled a company before? Do they have the experience? because you saw that Bored Ape transition when the VCs got involved and they did a big raise. And the VCs are good at organizing and scaling, but they're not always good at having soul and having substance. And as I sat in the Bored Ape Discord for 2 years as a researcher, I just saw that some of that soul kind of got sucked out of it. And then there's also hacks. So I think when a hack happens, and the frequency of hacks is important too. So the Bored Apes became kind of notorious for being compromised all the time. And so I think that that's a factor you really have to look at. And I think we may have underestimated the impact of hacks on the industry itself, because a lot of the liquidity when a hack happens leaves really quickly. And they were impacted by so many hacks and demoralized in so many ways. I think that accounts for kind of them toppling and flattening out. And I don't know what'll happen. But I think with Bitcoin, this is something that's really going to take Bitcoin to the next level. I was surprised to see some people fading it from kind of that more traditional miner Bitcoin community, because they've always hated everything but Bitcoin. But they sometimes just failed to see that this is something that's healthy for Bitcoin. And I was with a friend who's a Bitcoin miner the night that the ordinals were minting, and he was minting some, and he was like, man, this is so tricky. I don't know why anyone would want to do this. So I think sometimes we don't understand just how hard it was to mint sub 100K. You really had to have your
100%.
Yeah.
Adam, tell them your story about you could have been literally at sub 10. Adam was on the phone with Casey in like January trying to mint this stuff.
Yeah, prior to the launch of ordinals, he was trying to he was like, oh, you just need a full Bitcoin node, blah blah blah. I spent literally 4 days. First, I tried to do it on my Mac, and you needed I don't know, it's 550 gigs. So I'm deleting all my files so I have enough room on my Mac. Doesn't work. It's my Mac is whatever. It's a 5-year-old Mac. It was smoke coming out the back. I'm like, shit, let me do it as an external hard drive. So then I did it external, blah, 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 blah. Push comes to shove. I'm on with him. I think Raph, we're on a Zoom call, sharing my screen, trying to get the node running. Basically, dumbass me. I should have gone out, paid $1,000 for a computer and just done the thing. Did not, faded it completely. Raph felt so bad. I think it was Raph felt so bad for me. He's like, bro, just when it first launched, first day, he's like, bro, just give me a couple files. I'll just inscribe some stuff for you. Tell me what you want. I was like, nah, I'll figure it out. I didn't figure out shit. So
yeah, I was traveling for work. I was actually had to go from the Bay Area to Austin for work. And that was when the inscriptions were going from 300 to 1,000. And I was, trying to do this shit on hotel Wi-Fi. So it was terrible.
Yeah, generational wealth down the drain, but it's good, man. Sometimes the stories are better than the wealth, and being at the birth of ordinals is pretty awesome. And I think we can all, basically half the people in this room, can be pretty proud that we helped grow this thing. I think that's pretty awesome. Go ahead, Dogfather.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey guys. Yeah. I guess I missed the cool beginning part, but yeah, Adam, that's always a cool story. I think in a few years we will sit in Costa Rica at some cool place. Bit about these things, Jake is talking about some mooncats, and these stories are priceless. I mean, and some people in this room may even figure out how to get some old meme coin running. I heard stuff about that. I mean, there's so many cool stories, and Bitcoin definitely has so much to offer. It wouldn't be the same if it were easy from the beginning, right? I mean, then if everyone can do it, it's nothing special, right? If you just click 2 buttons like nowadays for a simple inscription, that wouldn't be the thing, right? So we have so many interesting layers. Also, at the beginning it was hard to inscribe. Later it was hard to have a cool uncommon sub to inscribe upon. Then you have parent-child and all these things. So the good thing is there's always something coming new. So it doesn't matter if you just enter the space right now. There's something cool new happening. JDog is building BTNS, on Counterparty. There's always something. I mean, you're never too late. Just open your eyes, be active, and there will be something new, and you can jump on that, can develop that, can help growing a community. So that's so awesome. You're never too late here. That's so cool.
Totally agree.
it seems like NodeMonkes will be leading the inscription charge until something otherwise pops up, whether it's the shrooms or the wizards or just something completely new. But before NodeMonkes, BRC20 was leading the charge for a while. It still really is, right? Out of 52 million inscriptions, 50 million of them are BRC20 transactions. It's insane. But I don't know if you guys have been following it recently. There is somewhat of an existential crisis that's happening for BRC20 right now. If you're following Domo, I hit up Domo to come on. He didn't respond. Domo and Unisat got in a little spat yesterday about control over BRC20. And kind of the short form of it is, if you remember, BRC20 was first under attack by Casey. Casey has made it very known that he's not a big fan of BRC20, so much that he's creating runes kind of in spite of it to so that it can have an actual competitor. So because of this, Domo decided to freeze BRC20 upgrades at ORD 0.9. And the reason why is because anything after 0.9 has some sort of impact in the way that BRC20s are traded. I don't know if it's I don't know technically if there's anybody technically that knows the difference can come up and talk about it, but there's something where anything past 0.9 has some serious ramifications to how BRC20s will be utilized. So Domo issued this freeze. He also started the Layer 1 Foundation, which is a nonprofit, which is supposed to keep the integrity of BRC20 going. So because of this, then Unisat, which is the leading BRC20 marketplace, they've created their own centralized module, which is similar to like a Uniswap for BRC20s. It's called black modules and white modules. They came out yesterday and said that they're going to be upgrading everything to the Jubilee. The Jubilee is ORD 1.0, which is supposed to be like, this is like the finalization of ORD. And Casey and Raf have mentioned that they're going to slow development down after the Jubilee, which is supposed to kind of perfect it. Unisat came out and said that they're going to be upgrading it. Domo came out, and I think Adam pinned it to the top of Domo saying, what Unisat is doing is they're trying to take control of BRC20 because of this upgrade and because they are the leading platform for trading BRC20s. There's going to be what's called a split, which means that every other marketplace outside of Unisat will be operating off two different rule sets. And that has a huge existential problem to anybody who's trading BRC20s, because if you have the leading marketplace using a different rule set comparative to every other marketplace who's using 0.9, people are going to lose enormous amounts of money because there's basically two different databases that are tracking two different things. Unisat even came out after Domo said, and they said, we're continuing with the upgrade. They came out and said that they're going to continue to do it. They noted that they're going to do it because they have basically a bottom line, and that if they don't upgrade the entire protocol, then everything else that they have with inscriptions and all these other things could also be affected by it. So, it's a business decision on their end. Domo thinks it's a power control. And, it's tough to really see where it goes from here. But when they have the Jubilee in 2 days, right, that's when we'll find out if BRC20 breaks or not.
What?
We did invite Dima up here, who's, a dev. I'd like to know first your take on it, and also if you know anything technically about the differences between the Jubilee of BRC20 and like the 0.9.
Yeah, I actually came up for this topic specifically. So I was talking about it yesterday on the Ordinal Support Desk, which is like one of my favorite DGen spaces.
It is a good show. Yeah, it is.
On Twitter. They somehow are always running it, and it's hilarious. A lot of alpha in there too, by the way. But in regards to this, I was talking about it yesterday a bit, and I think that it is a bit of a power move by Unisat for sure, because they're aware that most people that transact BRC20s use their wallet exclusively. Also, what's weird is that Unisat doesn't have to, while they're saying that it's like, oh, this is for the rest of the inscriptions. They totally could run 0.9 just for BRC20s, and then for all the regular ordinal trading on their platform, they could just use the newest version of Ord. So I think that while they're saying that, it's just more of an engineering problem to have two versions of Ord running, but it's totally doable. They're just choosing not to. I was also saying that, well, I appreciate what the Layer 1 Foundation is trying to do. I think that should be a counterbalance to them to push them to adopt the newest versions of Ord. And obviously, like the 0.1 releases that often come with bugs, maybe you should hesitate on those. But I don't want to see a world where they're still running 0.9 like 4 months from now, So that's kind of my take on it. On the difference between the Jubilee and the pre and post Jubilee version of the indexer, I don't know how many people did cursed BRC20s. I know that there was cursed tap.
I know a lot of people did.
Yeah, so
they're I don't even need to know that. I know they're there for sure, right? Like,
yeah. So I don't know. I'm waiting for the dust to settle a little bit, but I think that while Unisat is right that it would be harder for them to support both versions of the indexer, they totally could. It's just like a technological challenge, but like you could.
So what does it benefit them to just move quickly and just do this? What's
They're a startup. They want to be cutting edge. They're a for-profit, and they clearly see the benefits in being the leaders of this protocol. And when you have something like a protocol, whoever is the best development team and the fastest moving and has the most tooling and the most dev firepower, most people are going, and also like the cultural capital. That's where people are going to gravitate towards.
Give an example, like a high level example for normies here. Like what could happen where a trade happens on Unisat and then gets screwed up based on an old, the old indexer. Like give an example of what that could look like from a loss perspective.
I don't even. I feel like for most BRC20 trades, unless there's something specific that's changed in how text inscriptions are used, I don't even think there would be a difference for most. I think all the cursed ones would probably break if you traded them on one and the balance wouldn't change on the other. I think that's a possibility, but I don't think it's as catastrophic as people are.
So maybe only like an issue with like cursed or something like that. Maybe only an issue.
But it's also the question of, okay, if Unisat's always going to update their indexer and the Layer 1 Foundation is going to stay on 0.9 for a long time, then we may end up in a situation where something does change and Unisat's like, listen, we've already said we're going to keep pushing forward. So this is kind of just them putting their foot down and saying, this is what we're going to do. We don't actually have to listen to anyone because they don't. And like I said, I actually think it's a good counterbalance to the Layer 1 Foundation, because I don't want to see a situation where they don't update Ord for like 3 or 4 months and they get cozy on 0.9. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things that could happen here, right? Either Unisat has this upgrade, there's nothing that happens, and they just kind of run away with it. They take the power control, and Layer 1 Foundation is adjusting to it. And what they either do is they fork it, right? And they create their own meta protocol for BRC20, this is actually something that I was advocating for back in last October when Casey came out basically to the forefront and said that I'm not a big BRC20 fan and I'm trying to get it off of ordinals. To take BRC20, create it as its own meta protocol, right? It'd be similar as like ordinal theory, atomicals, BRC20, right? That could be something that eventually happens. Or you have another startup come in and they basically decimate Unisat by using 0.9, and their product is so superior that everyone just leaves Unisat and uses this product, and then Unisat now lost power, and then they also lost their capital. Also keep in mind that Unisat is funded by Binance, I believe, or Binance was in the round for Unisat. So they are backed, right, by larger entities who also control the leverage trading of BRC20. So right now they already have a hand in some of the power, and this is kind of a larger grab. What do you think, Dog Poly?
Yeah, so one thing I fundamentally don't really understand is why UNICEF has so much power, because when I look at the volume at, OKX, Binance and the like, I mean, it's happening on these centralized exchanges. I mean, maybe using the UNICEF wallet, but I mean, the profit line, right? So the fees and so on, they're not basically charged by the UNICEF marketplace anymore. So I don't really get why UNICEF is so important. Is it why because everyone is using the indexer, or what is the real issue?
I think that's exactly it, Dogfather. I think that I'd be willing to put money on Binance having invested in the round with Unisat. They use Unisat's indexer. I know that Alex Labs does something a little different. They have this thing called the Bitcoin Oracle, where they do like an N of M architecture, which essentially means more than 3 or more indexers. That way, if 2 are saying one thing and 1's saying the other, they go with what 2 is saying, or 2 or more. Whatever the majority of the indexers is saying, they will use that as the source of truth. That's kind of what we're working on with them for Stacks 20, because Alex Labs wants to build a marketplace for them. And we're kind of looking at how BRC20 institutions did it, because there's a best in slot indexer. I believe there's a Unisat indexer. And there is a few other players there, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, the answer is a lot of people use the Unisat indexer.
Yeah, I think this also might be getting at the heart of maybe why Domo feels betrayed, because if you remember, Alex Labs creating this BRC20 Oracle was announced at the same time of the formation of the Layer 1 Foundation, and the 5 indexing, or the 5 teams who were providing indexing for the Bitcoin Oracle, as you said, as of the N of M. Unisat was one of those 5 parties. It was like Unisat, OKX, best in slot. There's 5 of them. And so now this is basically Unisat saying fuck you to the Layer 1 Foundation and to the Oracle. And they said, we're just going to go create our own thing. Because if that's the case with the Oracle, right, where if there's 5 people providing indexing and you need 4 or 5 to correct or to have the same information, then Unisat's the out party, right? Then nothing there actually works on their platform. So this is them opting out, and probably Domo feeling a little bit betrayed kind of because of it. I
thought there was a funny tweet I just pinned to the top from Joe Looney. He writes, 2024 will be the year of the indexer fork. Everyone learning in real time the security trade-offs of off-chain smart contracts.
It's true. I mean, this is the one of the faults of why people didn't like Bitcoin oracles to begin with, right? The ownership layer is off chain, the data layer is on chain. It's the opposite of Ethereum, to where the ownership layer is on chain and the data is off chain. Yep. So here with this is what makes indexing the crux of the entire ecosystem. And also, the Bitcoin devs, right? The Bitcoin core devs, as we know, are not fans of ordinals. So to get that ownership layer hard coded into Bitcoin is going to take some years, right? It's going to take many, many years. You're going to need people like Michael Saylor and all these people advocating for it to happen. Because if you remember the last real issue with Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin Cash fork, where it was really divided. And I could tell you, like, I was around at that time. It was really tough to know what was actually going to happen there. Yep. And people left the ecosystem. That's why everyone went to ETH. And if that's the same situation that could end up here, whether it's because of BRC20 or ordinals in general, because that ownership layer of ordinals is not hard coded into Bitcoin, you're going to have these issues where people are going to take power control, or they just see the dollar signs and they want to take it, right? Or it could be something even worse, right? Maybe, people are just trying to intentionally sabotage it. It's tough to really know the intentions when the ownership layer is off chain.
Could get crazy. It could get crazy, man. Yeah. And who has the power from the social consensus layer to say this is the right indexer? I mean, bro, it could get pretty ugly.
Yeah, I mean, look at, you have Sats. I think Ordi had a sell off today. This is probably the time where you have a consolidation period and things need to get worked out before the next leg up from it. But this also leaves a good opportunity for any other fungible standard on Bitcoin to come in and, say they're the superior one or they have more network adoption. As we've learned on Bitcoin, the supreme technology does not always win.
No, not at all.
It's the social consensus is really what drives it. What do you think, Dima?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Did anyone else have this perception though, that when Sats was being minted out and when it launched, I thought that the Layer 1 Foundation and Domo were a part of that in some way or another? There was no like clear association. It was just my hunch, I guess. And because it just made sense, to have this kind of governance token, this swap token that has an incredibly high supply. I thought that like every player in BRC20 was just max minting the hell out of it. But now I actually don't know where the allegiances lie. It's really, as somebody who just is watching from the sidelines and trying to construct a narrative as best they can by, reading official tweets and listening to people talk in spaces and, what we all do, what anyone here that's trying to have an edge on the market is doing. It really wasn't like, this was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, it really is. That is also another good point of maybe the incentives of Unisat. So for their modular swap tool, right, you have to deposit your assets into it. And there's a point where users can't get their assets out until it's kind of approved, it becomes this white module. But they also integrated Sats, the might be the most valuable or second most valuable BRC20, sitting around over $1 billion market cap, as their gas fees on their swap tool. And you can assume, right, even Demo saying this, they were the ones that were probably minting a lot of these or inscribing it. They've probably allocated, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to building this product and also to acquiring Sats so that it can be used as the gas. But it is centralized, right? And this goes kind of against the ethos of what Domo believes. It's also kind of against the ethos of, Bitcoiners in general, although we know there's just a million trade-offs in the blockchain trilemma, and you can never satisfy everybody. But it's the move fast and break things. And Domo even says this in his post, is that we need to slow down the beautiful component of BRC20 is that it's simple. There's 3 actions you could do: deploy, mint, and transfer, right? And so with this centralized model, you're basically adding other kind of functionalities to it, which isn't part of the original vision. And so Domo wants to slow down. They want to move fast. They have incentives, and something will happen. Also, just the fact that the foundational layer of ordinal theory and the creator is not supportive of BRC20, right? You're kind of in a sandwich. And this is why I was talking about back in August or back in, October, September, that I think eventually they're just going to have to fork it and just become its own meta protocol. I think now, you have over $4 billion in value in BRC20. I don't think it would be that bad of a decision to consider. I've been saying it for a while. I know you want to try to stay true, and you will definitely lose some of the network effect if you leave ordinal theory and fork it, but it's kind of just unprecedented kind of areas. What do you think, on-chain?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I don't think there's any chance that ordinals in general fork off of Bitcoin just because of how profitable it's been.
No, I meant BRC20 forking off of ordinals.
No, yeah, of course. But I'm saying just in general, I don't think it's possible. However, I do think it's possible that the BRC20 forks off because, like, obviously the Bitcoin core, developers still have their panties in a wad and they still are, complaining about the spam on the network and whatnot. But I think where we really need to avoid is, like you're saying, centralized, indexing, centralized decision making when it comes to these meta protocols. I think like there are, some of the air quote toxic maximalists, who understand ordinals and they see the value of it. I think I'm included in that. But I think once we start getting to like, I think that's also one of the biggest things they don't like about Casey and ordinal theory is that the ordinal theory itself is, a centralized idea coming from Casey saying that like these Satoshis are rare, these are uncommon, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Bitcoiners like things that are decentralized. So I think we just need to steer in that direction.
Yeah, I agree as well. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I do think there will be a handful of BRC20 products that come out that will probably come and challenge Unicef in a decentralized way. I know building on it is quite tough, right? I've actually been working on OmniSat for 9 months now, right? As a competitor to Unicef, right? In this like kind of DEX model, it is not easy to say the least. And I know there are other people who are building things in a similar way. I think like RuneX is one of them. There's like some L2 competitors as well. But now with the maturation of the space and more money coming in, Adam, we know this as from the Emblem side, the amount of people who want to invest or that want to invest, the first thing they lead with is Bitcoin, right? That's where all the capital dollars are going right now. I don't see that slowing down anytime. Whether that's positive or negative, right, is to be determined, I guess, because obviously capital leads to centralization, which leads to this situation that where we are today with Unicef. But it does lead to progress, which is ultimately, I think, what we're all here for, is progressing and having this kind of self-sovereign kind of model. What do you think, Hydrate?
I had a quick question. What is the biggest image technically that you could put on a sat? Like, is there a size limit?
4 megabytes. That's like the extent of the witness data. And to do it now, I think would cost, I don't know, mid six figures, maybe even 7 figures. But they have, there's something called recursion, which is this idea that sats can reference one another. So what people are doing is they'll take the JSONs or the traits and they'll spread it across, dozens of different ordinals. And then they all reference each other to construct that image on an individual sat, kind of like a generative kind of idea. And that lowers the inscription cost by like 50 to 90%. But even at, over 100 sats per VByte or 2, it's still largely somewhat expensive to the average individual. I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of these like larger accounts now come in and say that Bitcoin's the luxury chain and that, right. And that I think Moon Overlord had kind of this funny tweet where he was talking about how bullish he was on ordinals. And he was like, it's like the one issue about ordinals is it's kind of like luxury chains where you order something, you pay. And he's like, in the real world, you'll buy, a diamond necklace and it'll take 3 weeks to come. He's like, but here on ordinals, you buy something for, over 10K and it takes 30 minutes to an hour. And he's like, who gives a shit? It's like the most true thing, right? He's like, what's the difference between 30 minutes to an hour? This is infinitely better than things that exist in the real world. And I think that seems to be kind of where the mind share of these new entrants who have large treasuries are coming in and kind of thinking about the same way, which is reinforcing because we've been talking about that since the beginning.
Literally, that was the overriding thought process was this is going to be, the most valuable block space on Earth, and this storage layer is going to be valuable. This is going to be where people are going to want to put their most valuable digital items. That was the general.
I have an image that was like it's 190 kilobyte image that was inscribed for $75, I think back in March. And I think to inscribe it today, it would be $4,000.
It's insane.
That's part of the fun is kind of like I do it on ETH. So I'm trying to get the biggest images possible on there, and it's 96 kilobytes. And all summer I was doing this when gas was low. And if you can get down to the 7, 8, 9 Gwei range, it's pretty reasonable, like 0.015. But it scales up massively once you get to like 15 Gwei. And I've done, I think, 8 images so far, and I try to get them in that sweet spot. But I strip all the metadata and do the compression. And then recently I've been adding a small amount of on-chain metadata back to the photos to tell that story. But basically I'm trying to entice, I have a big network at Nat Geo because I helped Michael Yamashita do all of his NFT stuff back in the day. So a lot of these people, I'm in their ear, and I'm basically, I want to give them options if they want to do Bitcoin, if they want to do Ethereum, because I see those really as the 2 top most viable ones. I think the other chains are really just speculation. I don't see permanence there yet. But yeah, basically I want to have these people preserve their archives and their most important historical moments on Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so playing with the gas has really been kind of fun because you have to increase the priority fee and do different things. But basically I'm trying to pioneer it for others, the big boys, to come in and start to do that. And I think we'll really see a lot of momentum if we can get those top tier kind of traditional photographers being willing to do this. And the images look great. You know, you can tell a big story with 96 kilobytes. So exciting to hear about Bitcoin. I'm going to do a little experimenting with it coming up.
Yeah, there's going to be an infinite amount of curation for Bitcoin, right? I mean, Adam and I, and Chris, we talk about this a lot, that we're still the 0.5% or 1% of the world who's participating in this. And anytime you try to talk to any of your friends about it, they either give you the eye roll or they're just really confused. And a lot of time they just need to be handheld and white glove services. I mean, even at Emblem Vault, people consistently ask us how to vault stuff. And it's like, it's a 3-click process, but it's because they haven't gone through that experience yet that they don't know how to do it. But once you do take them through a handful of times, then it becomes automated. So no matter what industry, whether it's photography or cross-chain protocols or ordinals, right, or inscribing data, huge opportunity for anyone here who's listening to come in and build a real, sound kind of company and type of product.
I want to touch back on something you were saying, Jake, about, or it might have been Adam, about how it's a luxury chain. And it costs X to inscribe, whatever. It seemed, as soon as I heard about ordinals, not the first time, that's a lie. When I heard about them in February and my buddies were buying Bitcoin frogs, I think that was in February, I was like, I don't have any Bitcoin, I only have Ethereum right now. I would love to participate, but I can't. And then about a month later, I actually read what ordinals was about, and then I started building my own thing. But as soon as I really read it and understood it, and someone who's always had an appreciation for Bitcoin and crypto in general because of its anti-bank status, I think specifically Bitcoin, I was like, oh my God, this is the most obvious thing ever. And I wonder why, for people that have been in crypto for as long as they've even been trading NFTs on Ethereum, I don't know why it wasn't as immediately obvious to them. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I think it's because of heavy bags, and when you have bags that are really heavy, it's hard. You don't want to be like, oh, these might be worth less because Bitcoin is the de facto blockchain. It is the most distributed. Proof of work makes it the best, and a lot of environmentalists, hate that, but it makes it the best. There is a impossible to control the entire network because of the fucking electrical costs of Bitcoin. Like, it is just the best thing for blockchain technology. Why would you not want assets on it?
Well, I think just, thinking back on it, I mean, it's always perfectly obvious in hindsight, but I think, there was questions on, and obviously right at the beginning of ordinals, there was this question of like what Jake touched on. Well, the ownership's, off chain, and therefore is it real? And this is all fake. This is all a scam. I mean, these same sort of questions that we get in any part of crypto, rise up, and they rise up from Bitcoin native people. Like, this is a scam. I can look back on plenty of tweets where people are talking about this is a scam, this is bullshit, right? So yes, it was obvious to us who were there and believed in it, but that doesn't make it as obvious as it is today, because today, obviously, all this money's come in, all this development's come in, the infrastructure's been built out. So now it's fully obvious, right? So this is kind of like the story of all, huge wins, where people have huge wins. It's like, it's obvious, but it's not fully obvious at the beginning ever, right? If it was fully obvious at the beginning, I would have gone out and bought a computer to run the Bitcoin node, right? So it's never fully obvious. Yeah. It wasn't $1,500 obvious to me, right? It was obvious, but it wasn't enough for me to take a $1,500 risk, right? You know what I mean?
I'll admit I thought I had more time. That's what I'll say. I knew it was obvious, but I thought I had more fucking time. I should have all my NFTs. I liquidated every single. I don't own anything that's worth more than 0.01. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been gone.
Oh my God. 0x Dima. That's exactly what you just said. Is one of the biggest points that I tell Bitcoin maxis when I'm talking to them about inscriptions. And I'm like, look, all of my ETH maxi friends who are literally, CryptoPunk 2018 holders are talking about buying Bitcoin for the first time. I mean, what you just said was, oh, dude, I don't have any Bitcoin laying around. And now you're like full-blown Bitcoiner. that's what we want, right? Like that's the whole point of, I think, inscriptions, in my opinion.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah, it's it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. We're in a full new year. I'm excited to see what type of new technologies really pop up with the Jubilee. This was kind of what we talked about this before as well, and it got a little bit of heat in terms of moving BRC20 off and creating all these more efficiencies. I think the Ordinal core team, which is only a handful of people, really saw, probably during the summer that in order for them to push this to commercial scale and to get some of these large either capital allocators or large, crypto institutions to come in and really start building on it, it needs to either cut out the spam, quote unquote, because of philosophical views, or they need to improve the technical features. And, Casey made that move at behest of two of his largest communities, right? BRC20, and he even came out against Bitmap as well, to say, hey, we need to improve this protocol. And whether that was a positive or negative, I think is to be determined. He did lose a little bit of credibility. I see it on the timeline a lot. If people don't take Casey, as serious as they once did, yes, he's respected, but I see differing opinions a lot more now because of that. He's definitely a genius, but now that's starting to trickle down right into the startup world as we're getting with the BRC20, right? It's kind of this similar situation. Unisat says they need to scale in order to push the protocol forward. Domo wants to keep decentralization integrity intact and wants to move slower. And again, so it's very similar kind of situation in terms of scale for BRC20. Go ahead, Hydrate.
I just can't emphasize enough how spot on that take is on getting people to care about Bitcoin. And I'll be honest, like I bought a little Bitcoin over the years, but I've been completely doing stuff on ETH and fading the hell out of it. And this is the first time I've not only cared about Bitcoin, wanted to buy it, but saw how important it is and how much it will scale because of this. So just absolutely groundbreaking to see this come out. I think it changes the game completely, because we looked at Bitcoin before as just a slow, kind of stable store of value, and it has its ups and downs. But what can I use it for? Is Lightning working? All questions happening in my mind. But now that I see this, it's game on. And I think you'll see a lot more people participating in the network.
Yeah, native ecosystems are definitely improving, to say the least. Ultimately, Adam and I, and Chris, we've kind of found this out that meeting collectors where they are is really important. Also, users who own a cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, whatever, they want to do stuff with it. They want to hold it. At least the newer wave, maybe people who came in after the Bitcoin Cash fork. They want to put that to use. They don't want it to be just a transactional layer. And Bitcoin is now what we thought was going to be just transactions is now not that. Now it's kind of been modernized. Bitcoin, what do they call it? Bitcoin season 2, I think is like what Udi and Leo and them call it. And I think that's what a lot of 2024 is going to be. New ideas that are going to come. There's going to be more of these tensions as more capital kind of comes in. But again, I think it would be important to try to emphasize, like what Domo is saying, keep the integrity of the original vision of Bitcoin in, right? Because if Michael Saylor owns 160,000 Bitcoin and BlackRock's going to own all this stuff, right? That the asset itself is going to get consolidated into larger institutions, whether it's banks or hedge funds, right? Or, even just large corporations. But we do have these single Satoshis now that carry social capital, which are things that they really can't acquire, or they're going to have to spend big dollars to come in and take that over. But to keep the ethos there, it's very important. I do want to end this show here. For those that don't know, Adam, myself, and Chris, we work at Emblem Vault. We host this show Tuesday through Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. We cover usually everything from Bitcoin, ordinals, collecting, historical NFTs, pretty much just anything that surrounds kind of this like non-PFP type culture, less trading, more collecting and philosophical takes. We'll be back tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure that you follow everyone here on stage. Make sure you follow Emblem Vault. We have a lot of things that are going to be coming out over the next few months, especially a chain agnostic marketplace. We just released our SDK for builders who want to take their assets across chain. A lot of fun things that are coming, guys. Really appreciate everyone on stage. You do amazing takes. Dima, Prism, Hydrate, Cowboy, everyone who's here. appreciate everyone. And until then, dude, stay safe out there. And we will see you guys tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time.